Hello, geometry. So we're doing triangle congruence proofs and we're doing two-column proofs. So again, my statement's always on the left side, my reason is on the right side. Whenever I start my proof, I always want to start off with the given. So my given in this one is that AB is parallel to DC. So I'm going to write that. AB is parallel to DC. And then the second thing they gave me was AD was parallel to BC. So AD is parallel to DC. So I'm going to write those two things down, and the reason why they're true is because they were given. So their reason is that they're given. I know what they want me to prove. That's always going to be my last statement. So these two things are true because they're given. When we're doing triangle congruence statements, you want them to give you things that are congruent. So whenever they give you information, you want to mark it down. So they told me that AB was parallel to DC. So I'm going to mark that down. But they didn't mark anything congruent. And then they told me that AD was parallel to BC. But that didn't mark anything congruent. So if when you're marking it, the given information, if it's not marking something congruent, then you got to ask yourself, well, what is it telling me that it's congruent? So since AB is parallel to DC, I know that alternate interior angles are congruent. So I can say angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. And the reason why I know is because alternate interior angles are congruent. So alternate interior, that's what I can write. So anytime they tell you have parallel lines, look and see, are there alternate interior angles? Because a lot of time that's what they want you to say. Now, since AD is parallel to BC, I know that angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. And again, how do I know that? Because alternate interior angles are congruent. Now, I've only got two things that I marked here, and I know I need three things to prove congruence. So I'm going to go and look and see if I have any hints. I should see my reflexive side right here. So my next statement can say AC is congruent to itself, to AC. And I know that's true because of my reflexive property. And now I can say my two triangles are congruent. So triangle ABC is congruent to triangle CDA. And how is that true? Well, I can see this is an angle, side, angle. And that's how we do our two-column proofs. So you want to start with your given. See what that given tells you. If your given marks things congruent, that's the best part. It's super easy. But if it doesn't just automatically mark something congruent, see what it can mark congruent for you. Look and see if you have reflexive sides, vertical angles, any of those hints to mark those congruent as well. And then you can always prove the triangle's congruent from our postulates. So we go to the next one. Again, when I start my problem, I'm going to start it with my givens. So my first given is angle Q is congruent to angle S. How do I know that's true? It's given to me. My second thing that was given is that R is the midpoint of QS. How do I know that's true? Because it's given. So now I'm going to go to my image and I'm going to mark down what the given was. So they told me Q was congruent to S, so I'm going to mark those two angles congruent. And then they told me R is the midpoint of QS. Well, that doesn't mark anything congruent for me, so what is that telling me? Well, if R is the midpoint, that tells me that QR is congruent to RS. So I'm going to mark that, but now I'm also going to write that statement. So again, we said that QR is congruent to RS, and the reason why we knew that was true was because of the definition of midpoint. So whenever they tell you you have the midpoint, you know you can use the definition of the midpoint. Now, again, I only have 2 things marked congruent in a triangle. I need 3 things. So I want to look and see if there's something else that I can say is congruent. Well, I have my vertical angles right here that I can say is congruent. So now I'm going to say angle PRQ is congruent to angle SRT. And the reason why? Vertical angles. And we've learned a long time ago that vertical angles are congruent. Now we can go and say that those triangles are congruent. So we finish up our proof with the last statement. So triangle PRQ is congruent to triangle TRS. Why? This is an angle, side, angle. So we're going to do one more proof with you. So they gave that L is the midpoint of KM and GL is perpendicular to KM. So again, I'm always going to write my givens first. This is what they want me to prove, that these 2 triangles are congruent. So triangle KLG is congruent to triangle MLG. So if I write my first statement, I'm going to say L is the midpoint of KM. And how do I know that's true? Because it's given. And then I'm going to say that GL is perpendicular to KM. How do I know that's true? Because it's given. And now I want to mark up my triangle so I can kind of see which postulate I can use. So they said L is the midpoint of KM. That means L is in the middle of these 2 points on that segment. Again, that didn't mark anything congruent for me, so what is that telling me? Well, I know when I have the midpoint, it's cutting this segment into 2 congruent pieces. So now I know my next statement can be KL is congruent to LM. Well, how do I know that's true? The definition of midpoint. So when you don't have anything marked congruent from the statement, like it doesn't say this is congruent to that, we'll see what that statement is telling you because you're going to have to use that as a reason. Okay? So I got that part now. And then they told me that GL is perpendicular to KM. Okay? So if GL is perpendicular to KM, then that means that these meet at 90-degree angles. So I can say angle KLG and angle GLM are right angles. Okay, well, what's the reason? Why can I say they're right angles? That's the definition of perpendicular lines. So if they told me that these 2 lines are perpendicular, then I know that these have to be right angles. All right, so now if I know that these are right angles, now I can say that they're congruent. So I'm going to say angle KLG is congruent to angle GLM. Well, how do I know that those 2 angles are congruent? Right angles are congruent. Since I said that they're right angles, and I know that right angles are both 90 degrees, if these are both right angles, they both have to be congruent. Well, again, I need 3 pieces of information to prove it's congruent, so now I can use this hint. That's my reflexive side. So GL is congruent to GL. How do I know that? That's my reflexive property. Now I can prove what they want me to prove. I can say triangle KLG is congruent to triangle MLG. And how is it congruent? Side, angle, side.